The rain came down in sheets that October evening, turning the parking garage into a cathedral of echoes. Matthew Shaw had been reaching for his daughter's forgotten ballet shoes in the back seat of his decade-old Honda when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not the usual slam of car doors or the hydraulic hiss of the elevator. This was sharper, desperate. A woman's voice cutting through the storm's static, followed by the violent scrape of heels against concrete. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. His body responded before his mind caught up. Muscle memory from another life flooding back like water breaking through a dam. Matthew moved toward the sound with the predatory silence he'd learned in Kandahar. His work boots barely whispering against the oil-stained floor. The ballet shoes, pink satin with frayed ribbons that Emma had worn until the fabric turned gray, fell forgotten onto the passenger seat. 3 men had her pinned against a black Mercedes, their movements coordinated in a way that spoke of planning. The woman was tall, elegant even in terror, her designer suit rumpled and torn at the shoulder. One man held a chloroform-soaked cloth while another worked to zip-tie her wrists. The third stood watch, a Glock held low against his thigh, his eyes scanning the shadows with the bored efficiency of a professional. Matthew recognized the choreography. This wasn't desperation or opportunism. This was extraction. The woman's eyes found his across 30 feet of empty space, and in that moment, Matthew saw something that made his chest tighten. The same look Emma had worn the night her mother left, that devastating combination of hope and certainty that no one was coming. The woman's lips moved, forming a word Matthew couldn't hear over the rain hammering the garage's metal roof. But he understood it anyway. Please. He'd promised himself after Fallujah that he was done saving people. That chapter had closed the day he'd carried his best friend's body through streets that smelled of burning plastic and copper. He'd come home to Seattle to be a father, to coach Emma's soccer team, to work his maintenance job at the hospital and live a quiet life measured in parent-teacher conferences and bedtime stories. Violence was supposed to be something he left in the desert, buried under sand and silence. But some promises Matthew had learned were made to be broken. The first man went down before any of them realized they weren't alone. Matthew caught him from behind, one arm hooking around the throat in a blood choke that rendered him unconscious in 4 seconds. The Glock clattered to the concrete, and Matthew kicked it under a nearby Lexus in one smooth motion. The sound finally registered with the others. Hey! The second man, tall, with a spider tattoo crawling up his neck, released the woman's wrists and spun toward Matthew. His hand went to his waistband, reaching for iron, but Matthew closed the distance faster than thought. A straight punch to the solar plexus folded him like paper, and as he doubled over, Matthew's knee met his face with a crack that echoed off the concrete pillars. The third man was smarter. He'd backed away, putting the Mercedes between himself and Matthew, and his hands were raised in a gesture that might have been surrender if not for the calculating glint in his eyes. He was older than the others, maybe 45, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of expensive watch that Matthew's annual salary couldn't touch. "You don't want to do this, friend," the man said, his voice carrying the flat accent of Eastern Europe, Russian, maybe Ukrainian. "You have no idea what you're interrupting." "I know exactly what I'm interrupting," Matthew replied, his own voice steady despite the adrenaline singing through his veins. His hands were still raised in a combat stance, weight balanced on the balls of his feet. The woman had collapsed against the Mercedes, her breathing ragged, mascara streaking down her cheeks like war paint. The man tilted his head, studying Matthew with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. "Former military. Army from the stance. Ranger? No, too old for that. Infantry, then. Iraq or Afghanistan? Both. Ah." The man smiled, showing perfect white teeth. "Then you understand. This is business, yes? Walk away. Take your... What is it, grocery shopping?" He gestured toward Matthew's Honda with its faded paint and cracked windshield. "Take your shopping and go home. This woman, she is not your concern." Matthew didn't move. Behind him, he could hear the first man starting to stir, groaning against the concrete. The second remained motionless, blood pooling beneath his face. The woman's eyes were locked on Matthew, and he could see her trembling despite her attempt to stand straight. "Here's how this goes," Matthew said quietly. "You walk away. Now, your friends wake up, you get them medical attention, and you disappear. I don't call the cops, you don't try to follow her. We all go home." The man's smile widened. "And if I say no?" Matthew's expression didn't change. "Then I put you down too." For a long moment, they stood frozen in tableau. Matthew with his scarred knuckles and thrift store jacket, the kidnapper with his designer clothes and cold calculation. The woman between them like a prize neither had won. The rain drummed its ancient rhythm against metal and stone, washing away the blood, diluting it to pink rivers that ran toward the storm drains. The man reached into his pocket slowly, deliberately, and Matthew tensed. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a business card, cream-colored, embossed with lettering Matthew couldn't read from this distance. He set it on the Mercedes's hood. "You have made an enemy tonight, my friend," he said, still smiling that terrible smile. "But you have also made an impression. When they come for you, and they will come, remember that I gave you this chance to walk away." He moved toward his fallen comrades then, his movements unhurried, as if they had all the time in the world. He checked the second man's pulse, nodded once, then helped the first to his feet. The man with the spider tattoo remained unconscious, and the older man simply left him there, dragging his conscious partner toward the garage's exit with no more concern than if he were abandoning a broken tool. Matthew watched them disappear into the rain-blurred darkness, every instinct screaming at him to pursue, to finish it, to make sure they couldn't come back. But the woman made a sound, half sob, half gasp, and his attention snapped back to her. She'd slid down the Mercedes's door, her legs folded beneath her, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't seem to hold them still. Up close, Matthew could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe late 30s, with dark hair that had escaped from an elegant twist and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was a cut above her left eyebrow, bleeding freely, and her stockings were torn at both knees. "It's okay," Matthew said, keeping his voice low and steady as he approached. He'd learned this tone in the hospital, talking to confused patients at 3 in the morning, the same voice he used when Emma woke from nightmares. "You're safe now. My name is Matthew. I'm going to help you, okay?" She nodded, but the trembling didn't stop. Matthew pulled off his jacket, threadbare denim that Emma had patched with fabric markers, turning the holes into flowers, and draped it around her shoulders. She clutched it like a lifeline. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I think so." Her voice was hoarse, probably from screaming. She tried to rise, and Matthew offered his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong despite the shaking, her palm smooth against his callous skin. She made it halfway up before her legs buckled, and Matthew caught her, one arm supporting her weight. "Easy," he murmured. "Take your time. The adrenaline's wearing off. It's normal." She looked up at him then, really looked, and Matthew saw the moment recognition flickered across her face. Not of him specifically, but of what he was. The scars on his knuckles, the way he held himself, the practiced efficiency with which he dismantled 3 armed men. "You're military," she said. "Not a question." "Was. Long time ago." "Not that long, I think." She managed a shaky smile. "You move like someone who hasn't forgotten." Matthew didn't respond to that. Instead, he guided her away from the Mercedes, away from the man still unconscious on the concrete. He'd wake up soon, and Matthew wanted them gone before that happened. "We need to call the police. Get you to a hospital. That cut needs stitches." "No." The word came out sharp, almost panicked. She grabbed his arm with both hands. "No police. Not yet. Please." Matthew frowned. "Ma'am, you were just attacked. Kidnapped. This isn't." "I know what this is." She straightened, and despite the torn clothing and bleeding face, there was suddenly steel in her voice, an authority that made Matthew pause. "And I know that if we involve the police right now before I understand what's happening, it could make everything worse. Please, just give me a few hours." Help me get somewhere safe, and I'll explain everything. Every rational part of Matthew's brain screamed at him to refuse. He didn't know this woman, didn't know what she was involved in or why professional kidnappers had targeted her in a Seattle parking garage. He had Emma waiting at home with Mrs. Chun from downstairs, probably already past her bedtime, and he'd promised they'd watch that documentary about penguins together. But he looked at the woman's eyes, saw that same desperate hope, and knew he was already lost. 1 hour, he said finally. You've got 1 hour to convince me this makes sense. Then I'm calling 911 whether you like it or not. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. Thank you so much. She paused, and Matthew saw her make a decision. My name is Victoria. Victoria Ashford. The name meant nothing to Matthew. He nodded toward his Honda. Come on. Let's get you out of here before your friend wakes up. They made it halfway across the garage when Victoria stopped suddenly, pulling against his supporting arm. Wait, the card. That man left a card on my car. Victoria, please, I need to see it. Against his better judgment, Matthew helped her back to the Mercedes. The card sat where the kidnapper had left it, rain-spotted but readable. Victoria picked it up with trembling fingers, and Matthew watched her face go pale in the fluorescent light. What is it? He asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared at the card as if it were a death sentence, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, she looked up at Matthew, and there was something new in her expression. Not fear anymore, but a weary kind of resignation. That hour you gave me? She said quietly. I'm going to need it to explain why the most dangerous man in the Pacific Northwest just walked away from me, and why, by saving my life tonight, you might have just put your own in danger. Matthew thought about Emma sleeping safely at home, about the ballet shoes still sitting in his passenger seat, about the quiet life he'd built from the wreckage of war, piece by careful piece. He thought about the promise he'd made himself, the one about being done with violence, done with danger, done with missions that ended with blood on his hands. Then he looked at Victoria Ashford, standing in the rain with his daughter's artwork draped over her shoulders, and knew that quiet life was already gone. Come on, he said, guiding her toward the Honda. Let's get you somewhere dry. You can start explaining in the car. Behind them, the man with the spider tattoo began to groan, consciousness returning like an unwelcome dawn. Matthew didn't look back. He helped Victoria into the passenger seat, careful of her injuries, then slid behind the wheel. The engine coughed to life on the third try, and as they pulled out of the garage into the storm-lashed Seattle night, Matthew caught sight of the business card Victoria still clutched in her hand. Even from the driver's seat, he could read the name embossed in silver lettering, Dmitry Volkov, and below it, in smaller script, Acquisition Specialist. Matthew had no idea what that meant, but something in his gut, that same instinct that had kept him alive through 2 tours, told him he was about to find out. The rain hammered against the windshield, and somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. Matthew turned the opposite direction, toward the industrial district, toward the kind of anonymity that only the forgotten parts of a city could provide. In the passenger seat, Victoria Ashford closed her eyes and began to cry, silent tears mixing with the rain that dripped from her hair. She didn't make a sound, but her shoulders shook, and Matthew found himself reaching over to rest his hand gently on her arm. Not speaking, not trying to comfort, just offering the kind of silent presence he'd learned in the desert, when words were worse than useless. Thank you, she whispered finally, so quietly he almost didn't hear it over the rain. You don't know what you did tonight, what you saved me from. Matthew didn't respond. He just drove, the city lights blurring past like ghosts, and wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into, and more importantly, how he was going to protect Emma from whatever storm was coming. Because storms always came. That was another lesson from the desert. You could see them gathering on the horizon, dark and inevitable, and all you could do was find shelter and hold on to the people you loved. Matthew tightened his grip on the steering wheel and drove on into the rain. The safe house wasn't really safe, but it was dry, and that was something. Matthew pulled the Honda into an abandoned warehouse off Harbor Avenue. The kind of place where Seattle's maritime history went to die. Rusted equipment, broken windows patched with cardboard, the smell of brine and motor oil. He discovered it 6 months ago when Emma had insisted they go on an urban exploration adventure. Armed with her camera and an enthusiasm that made Matthew's heart ache with love and terror in equal measure, Victoria had stopped crying by the time he killed the engine. She sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. The dashboard light cast shadows across her face, making the cut above her eyebrow look deeper than it was. "This is where you bring kidnapping victims?" she asked, and there was a hint of humor in her voice that surprised Matthew. "I expected at least a motel." "Can't use a motel. They have cameras, require ID. This place, nobody cares what happens here." Matthew grabbed the first aid kit from under his seat. He'd learned to keep one after Emma's growth spurt had turned her into a collection of sharp elbows and scraped knees. "Come on. There's a night watchman's office on the 2nd floor that's actually got working heat." They climbed the rusted stairs in silence, Victoria moving slowly, testing each step before trusting it with her weight. Matthew stayed close, ready to catch her if the old metal gave way. The office was exactly as he'd left it. A space heater that somehow still worked, a desk missing 2 legs that Emma had propped up with concrete blocks, and a sleeping bag that smelled like mothballs and memories. Matthew plugged in the space heater and gestured for Victoria to sit on the one chair that didn't look like a tetanus risk. She sank into it gratefully, and for a moment, they just existed in the quiet hum of electric warmth, rain pattering against the warehouse's metal roof like fingers on a drum. "Let me look at that cut," Matthew said, kneeling beside her with the first aid kit. Victoria nodded, tilting her head to give him access. Up close, he could see she was beautiful in the way of people who'd never had to fight for anything. Smooth skin, perfect teeth, the kind of grooming that required money and time. But there was something else too. A hardness around the eyes that spoke of battles fought in boardrooms instead of deserts. He cleaned the wound with antiseptic wipes, his movements gentle despite his scarred hands. Victoria winced but didn't pull away. "You've done this before," she observed. "Yeah, my daughter's 8. She collects injuries like Pokemon cards." Matthew applied butterfly bandages, pulling the edges of the cut together. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold until she could see a real doctor. Though usually it scraped knees and splinters, not kidnapping attempts. "You have a daughter." Victoria's voice softened. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to drag you into this. If I'd known." "You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose to help." Matthew sat back on his heels, studying her. "But that hour I gave you is ticking. So start talking. Who are you, really? And why did those men want you?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her fingers worrying the edge of his jacket that she still wore. Finally, she reached into her torn skirt pocket and pulled out a phone, or what was left of one. The screen was shattered, the casing cracked, but she managed to power it on. She pulled up a photo and handed it to Matthew. The image showed Victoria in a different context. Power suit, confident smile, standing in front of a sleek glass building with Ashford Technologies emblazoned across its facade in chrome letters. Behind her, the Seattle skyline stretched toward a perfect blue sky. "Victoria Ashford," she said quietly, "CEO of Ashford Technologies. We're a tech company specializing in cybersecurity and data protection. We went public 3 years ago, and as of this morning's closing bell, the company was valued at $8.2 billion. Matthew stared at the photo, then at Victoria, then back at the photo. He'd expected something, maybe a lawyer, a doctor, someone with money enough to attract kidnappers. But a billionaire? In his car, wearing his daughter's artwork. "That's..." he started, then stopped. "Jesus. Yeah." Victoria took the phone back, her thumb tracing the shattered screen. "That's the public me. The woman who gives TED Talks and appears on magazine covers and gets photographed at charity galas. The one who built a company from nothing and broke through every glass ceiling they put in front of me. And the private you?" Victoria's expression hardened. "The private me is tired, Matthew. So goddamn tired. Because here's what they don't tell you about being a successful woman in tech. Every man who wants to work with you also wants to own you. And some of them don't take no for an answer. She stood then, pacing the small office like a caged animal, her torn stockings whispering against the concrete floor. 6 months ago, a man named Dmitry Volkov approached me about a partnership. He's officially a venture capitalist, specializes in Eastern European tech startups. Unofficially, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Let's just say he has connections that make people nervous. Russian oligarchs, former KGB, the kind of men who play chess with countries instead of pieces. Matthew thought about the man in the parking garage, his calm demeanor, the way he'd assessed Matthew with those cold eyes. And you said no. I said no. Loudly, publicly, at a board meeting where he'd brought investors I couldn't afford to piss off. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. I embarrassed him, made him look like a fool in front of people whose respect he'd spent years cultivating. And men like Dmitry Volkov, they don't forget that kind of humiliation. So he decided to kidnap you. What? Ransom? Leverage? Worse. Victoria stopped pacing, turning to face him. He wants my company. Not to buy it, I'd never sell to him. He wants to take it, piece by piece. He's been systematically stealing my key employees, poaching my best engineers with offers I can't match. 3 of my major clients terminated their contracts last month under mysterious circumstances. And then tonight, she touched the cut above her eyebrow. Tonight was the final move. If he'd succeeded, I'd have disappeared. Maybe I'd resurface in a few weeks, maybe I wouldn't. Either way, the company would collapse without me, the stock would crash, and Volkov would swoop in to buy the pieces for pennies on the dollar. Matthew felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd seen this kind of thing before, different context but same ruthless calculus. In Fallujah, they called it clearing the field, remove the obstacles, take what you want, leave no witnesses. You need to go to the police, FBI, someone, and tell them what? That one of the most respected venture capitalists in Seattle tried to kidnap me? Based on what evidence? Your testimony? Victoria shook her head. Volkov is too smart for that. He'll have alibis, witnesses, lawyers that cost more per hour than most people make in a month. And by the time any investigation gets anywhere, I'll be dead or disappeared, and it won't matter anyway. So what's your plan? I don't have one. Victoria's voice cracked, and suddenly she wasn't a billionaire CEO anymore. She was just a woman who'd come inches from disappearing into the kind of darkness Matthew had only seen in war zones. I came to that parking garage tonight because my assistant said there was a problem with my car. It was supposed to be empty. I thought. She laughed again, that brittle sound. I thought I was being paranoid, seeing threats everywhere. My therapist said I needed to trust more, worry less. Turns out paranoia was keeping me alive. Matthew stood, moving to the window that overlooked the dark harbor. Ships moved like ghosts through the rain, their lights reflecting off the water in streaks of gold and red. Somewhere out there, Emma was sleeping in their small apartment, dreaming whatever 8-year-olds dreamed about. Ballet and soccer and the Penguin documentary they'd never gotten to watch. He should walk away, should help Victoria file a police report, make sure she got somewhere safe, then go home to his daughter and his quiet life. This wasn't his fight. He'd done his part, played the hero, saved the woman. That should be enough. But he thought about the look in Volkov's eyes as he'd left that business card. When they come for you, and they will come. Tell me about your daughter, Victoria said suddenly, breaking the silence. What's her name? Emma. Matthew didn't turn from the window. Emma Jane Shaw. She's 8. Smart as hell, too smart probably. Wants to be a marine biologist when she grows up. Or a professional soccer player. Or both. She hasn't decided yet. She sounds amazing. She is. Matthew's throat tightened. After my wife left, Emma was 3. I thought I'd lose it. Didn't know how to be both parents, you know? I was working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. Coming home so tired I could barely stand. And Emma would be waiting with this big smile like I was the best thing in her world. Even though I was failing her every single day. I doubt that very much. You didn't see it. Matthew finally turned to face her. The times I forgot to pack her lunch. The parent-teacher conferences I missed. The way she learned to be so goddamn self-sufficient because she had to be, because I was too broken to be what she needed. But you kept trying, Victoria said softly. That's what matters. You didn't leave. You didn't give up. Matthew thought about Jessica, Emma's mother, and the note she'd left on the kitchen table. I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Take care of our girl. He'd been angry for years, then sad, and now he was just tired. Tired of being both parents, tired of the constant scramble to make ends meet, tired of lying awake at 3 in the morning wondering if he was doing enough, being enough. I work maintenance at Seattle General Hospital, he said, and he wasn't sure why he was telling her this. Night shift, mostly. Fixing broken equipment, replacing light bulbs, mopping floors. It's good work, honest work. Pays enough to keep Emma fed and clothed. Before that, I tried construction, tried security, tried everything. But the hospital, that's where I fit. Helping people, even if it's just making sure their room doesn't flood or their bed doesn't collapse. He moved to the sleeping bag, unrolling it and spreading it on the concrete floor. During the day, I sleep 4 or 5 hours, then I pick Emma up from school. We do homework together at the kitchen table. I can't help much with the math anymore. She's already doing stuff I don't understand, but I can listen while she explains it. Then there's dinner, usually something cheap. Pasta, rice, beans. Every Friday, we splurge on pizza from Angelo's down the street. Emma saves her pepperonis for last because she says they taste better when you're already full. Victoria was watching him with an expression Matthew couldn't read. He continued, the words spilling out like water from a burst dam. Bedtime is 8:30 on school nights, 9 on weekends. I read to her every night, even though she's old enough to read herself. Right now we're working through Harry Potter. She says I do the best Hagrid voice. After she's asleep, I do laundry, pay bills, try to figure out how to stretch the grocery budget another week. Sometimes Mrs. Chun from downstairs brings us leftover Chinese food. She pretends it's because she cooked too much, but I know the truth. People see us, the broke single dad and his kid, and they feel sorry for us. That's not pity, Victoria said. That's community. That's people caring. Maybe. Matthew sat on the edge of the desk, his hands folded between his knees. Emma plays soccer on Saturdays. I'm the assistant coach, which is hilarious because I know nothing about soccer. But I show up, I cheer, I bring orange slices at halftime. And every night before bed, after the reading, Emma hugs me and says, I love you, Daddy. You're the best daddy in the whole world. And I hold her tight and think about how I'm lying to her. Because I'm not the best. I'm just the one who stayed. The rain had intensified, drumming against the warehouse roof like applause or artillery. Matthew couldn't tell the difference anymore. He thought about Emma's face when he taught her to ride a bike, the mixture of terror and joy as she pedaled away from him for the first time. About the way she'd cried when her mother left, asking questions he couldn't answer. About the time she'd come home from school with a black eye because she'd defended another kid from a bully. And how proud Matthew had been even as his heart broke at her bruised face. I have nightmares, he said quietly. Not every night, but enough. About Fallujah, mostly. My best friend, Tommy Rodriguez. We called him Rod. He was 23, from Houston, wanted to be a firefighter when he got out. He died in my arms after a roadside bomb tore through our convoy. Took him 20 minutes to die, and he spent every second of it apologizing for bleeding on me. Victoria made a sound, but Matthew held up his hand. He needed to finish this, needed to say it all. I came home with survivor's guilt, PTSD, the works. The VA gave me pills that made everything fuzzy and therapy sessions where I sat in uncomfortable chairs and lied about how I was doing. I had a newborn daughter and a wife who looked at me like I was a stranger. And I felt like I'd left the best parts of myself in a desert on the other side of the world. He looked at Victoria, really looked at her. So when you ask why I helped you tonight, why I didn't just walk away, it's because I spent years walking away. From responsibility, from connection, from anything that might hurt. And it didn't save me. It just made me smaller. So when I saw you in that garage, saw that look in your eyes, I couldn't walk away again. Even if it was stupid, even if it puts Emma at risk. Because what's the point of surviving if you stop being human in the process? The space heater clicked off, its thermostat satisfied, and the sudden silence felt enormous. Victoria stood slowly, crossed the small space between them, and did something Matthew hadn't expected. She hugged him. Not the brief, professional embrace of business associates, but the real thing, desperate and grateful and human. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Not just for tonight, for seeing me, for treating me like a person instead of a headline or a bank account or a problem to be solved." Matthew let her hold him, his arms coming up automatically to return the embrace. She smelled like expensive perfume and rain and fear, and he found himself thinking about Jessica, about how long it had been since anyone had held him like this, since anyone had seen past the tired single dad to the man underneath. When Victoria finally pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks again, but she was smiling. "I need to ask you something, and you're absolutely allowed to say no." "What?" "Help me. Not forever, just until I can figure out what to do. You're former military, you know how to handle yourself, and more importantly, Volkov doesn't know who you are yet. You're invisible to him, which makes you the most valuable asset I have right now." Matthew thought about Emma, about their small apartment with its leaky faucet and the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a dragon, about Friday pizza nights and bedtime stories and the life they'd built from nothing, the two of them against the world. "I can't put Emma at risk," he said finally. "I know, and I wouldn't ask you to. But Matthew," Victoria's voice was urgent now, "Volkov left you that card as a message. He knows you interfered. He's going to come after you whether you help me or not. At least if we work together, we might have a chance of stopping him before anyone else gets hurt." She was right, and Matthew knew it. The moment he'd stepped into that garage, the moment he'd put hands on Volkov's men, he'd painted a target on his back. On Emma's back. The only question was whether he fought alone or with someone who actually understood what they were up against. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Victoria pulled out her shattered phone again, scrolling through contacts with her thumb. "I have a house. Not my main residence. Nobody knows about it except my lawyer and my accountant. It's in the San Juan Islands, about 2 hours north. Remote, secure, off the grid. I need to get there. Need time to think without looking over my shoulder every second. But I can't go alone. If Volkov's men are watching my usual security team, you need someone they won't expect." "Exactly." She looked up at him, and there was desperation in her eyes again, but also something else. "Hope. I'll pay you. Whatever you need. Enough to get Emma into a better school, to move to a better neighborhood, to—" "Stop." Matthew's voice was firmer than he intended. "If I do this, it's not for money. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. It's payment for services rendered. You'd be working as my security consultant. It's a legitimate job." Matthew almost laughed. Security consultant. A fancy title for bodyguard. For someone whose job was to stand between another person and the violence of the world. He'd done that in the army, and it had cost him everything that mattered. But maybe, just maybe, he could do it once more without losing himself completely. "One condition," he said. "Emma comes with us. I'm not leaving her in Seattle while Volkov's people are out there. She goes where I go, or the deal's off." Victoria nodded immediately. "Of course. The house is big enough, and honestly, having a child there might help. Make things feel less." She searched for the word. "Less like we're under siege." "We are under siege." Matthew checked his watch. "It's almost 10. I need to get home, pack some things, talk to Emma." "How long before Volkov realizes you're not in police custody?" "He probably already knows. He'll have people monitoring emergency frequencies, maybe contacts in the department." Victoria's jaw tightened. "We need to move fast. Tomorrow morning at the latest." "Okay. I'll come by your place." "No. Too risky. There's an old marina on the north end of Ballard, mostly abandoned. Cove Marina, it's called. Meet me there at 6 a.m. There's a boat, a yacht actually, registered under my lawyer's name. We'll take it to the island." Matthew nodded, committing the details to memory. 6 a.m. Cove Marina. Bring Emma, pack light, prepare for. What? A siege? An extended stay? He didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at him like an old wound. One more thing, Victoria said as they prepared to leave. That card Volkov left. The one with his name. Do you know what acquisitions specialist means? I figured it was corporate jargon. In Volkov's world, it means something very specific. It means he's the person you call when you want something that's not for sale. Art, companies, people. He acquires them. By any means necessary. She looked at Matthew, and in the dim light of the space heater, she looked every year of her age and more. You took something he wanted to acquire tonight. He won't forget that. Let him remember. Matthew surprised himself with the steel in his own voice. I've faced worse than a Russian mobster with delusions of grandeur. Have you? Victoria asked softly. Because Dmitry Volkov isn't a soldier following orders or a terrorist with a cause. He's a businessman who treats murder like a line item on a balance sheet. He doesn't get angry, he doesn't get scared. He just removes obstacles. And right now, Matthew, you're an obstacle. They left the warehouse together, Matthew checking the shadows before allowing Victoria to step outside. The rain had diminished to a persistent drizzle, and the city lights turned everything into a watercolor painting, bleeding at the edges. He drove her to a hotel downtown, not the Fairmont where she usually stayed, but a mid-range business hotel where nobody would think to look for a billionaire CEO. 6 a.m., she repeated as she climbed out of the Honda. Don't be late. And Matthew, hug your daughter extra tight tonight. After everything I've seen in business, all the deals and negotiations and power plays, you know what I envy most about you? What? You have someone worth fighting for. That's rarer than you think. Matthew watched her disappear into the hotel lobby, her torn suit and disheveled hair drawing curious glances from the night clerk. Then he drove home through the empty streets, his mind churning through possibilities and problems, strategies and scenarios. Emma was asleep when he got home, curled up on the couch with Mrs. Chun snoring gently in the armchair. Matthew paid her $40 he couldn't really afford and helped her back to her apartment. Then he stood in the doorway of Emma's room, watching her sleep. She looked so small in her twin bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and soccer trophies and drawings she'd made in art class. Her hair, dark like her mother's, was spread across the pillow, and she clutched her favorite stuffed penguin like it might swim away if she let go. Matthew knelt beside the bed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Hey, sweet pea, he whispered. Daddy's home. Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Daddy? Did you watch the penguins? Not yet, baby. We'll watch them later, I promise. Okay. She yawned, already drifting back to sleep. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, Emma. More than anything in the world. He stayed there for a long time, watching her breathe, thinking about the promise he'd made to keep her safe, about the choices he'd made tonight and the consequences that would come, about Dmitry Volkov and Victoria Ashford and the life he'd built that was already crumbling like sand castles against the tide. Tomorrow he'd pack their bags. Tomorrow, he'd take his daughter to a stranger's yacht and sail to an island he'd never seen. Tomorrow, he'd step back into the violence he'd sworn he left behind. But tonight, he just knelt beside his daughter's bed and prayed to a god he'd stopped believing in somewhere between Kandahar and Fallujah. Prayed that he wasn't making the biggest mistake of his life. Prayed that Emma would forgive him for dragging her into this. Prayed that they'd all survive what was coming. The rain drummed against the window, and somewhere in the city, Dmitry Volkov was planning his next move. But for now, in this small room with its peeling paint and second-hand furniture, Matthew Shaw held his daughter's hand and tried to memorize the feel of peace, because he had a feeling it was going to be a long time before he felt it again. Dawn came too quickly, painting the Seattle sky in shades of bruised purple and copper. Matthew had spent most of the night packing. Not the careful, methodical packing of a planned vacation, but the frantic selection of essentials by someone who knew they might not be coming back. Emma's clothes, her medications, the stuffed penguin she couldn't sleep without. His own belongings fit in a single duffel. Jeans, shirts, the photo of him and Tommy Rodriguez taken 2 weeks before Fallujah, and the Sig Sauer he'd kept hidden in a lockbox under his bed despite promising himself he'd never need it again. Emma had taken the news better than he'd expected. Or maybe she was just too sleepy at 5 in the morning to fully process what "Daddy needs to take you on an adventure for a few days" really meant. She sat in the passenger seat now, clutching her penguin and watching the city wake up through bleary eyes. "Is this because of the lady?" Emma asked suddenly, her voice small in the Honda's cramped interior. Matthew glanced at her, surprised. "What lady, Sweet Pea?" "The one you helped last night. Mrs. Chun said you came home late, and you had that look." "What look?" "The soldier look." Emma hugged her penguin tighter. "Like in the pictures from before I was born. The one where your eyes go far away." Matthew's chest tightened. She was too observant, too smart. "Yeah, baby. It's because of the lady. She needs help and it's complicated. But I promise you're safe. I won't let anything happen to you." "I know." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, as if Matthew's protection was as certain as gravity. "You're the best daddy in the whole world, remember?" He reached over and squeezed her hand, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Cove Marina materialized out of the morning mist like something from a ghost story. Sagging docks, abandoned boats with moss-covered hulls, the smell of rotting wood and salt water. Matthew parked in the shadows of a defunct cannery, scanning the area with the systematic precision of someone who'd learned that complacency killed. Victoria emerged from behind a boathouse, and Matthew barely recognized her. Gone was the torn designer suit, replaced by jeans, a fleece jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. She looked younger, more vulnerable, and when she saw Emma, her expression softened. "You must be Emma," Victoria said, crouching to the girl's level. "Your dad told me about you. I hear you want to be a marine biologist." Emma nodded shyly, pressing against Matthew's leg. "I like penguins. Penguins are excellent." Victoria smiled, and it was genuine. "I have a house where we're going, and there's a beach. Sometimes you can see seals from the deck. Not quite penguins, but close." "Seals are good too," Emma decided, and just like that, some of the tension in her small shoulders eased. The yacht was a 40-foot Beneteau, sleek and anonymous. Exactly the kind of boat wealthy people bought for weekends they never took. Victoria moved with surprising confidence as she prepped for departure, and Matthew realized she'd done this before. Probably many times, escaping to this hidden sanctuary when the pressure of being Victoria Ashford, Billionaire CEO, became too much. They were 20 minutes out, the Seattle skyline shrinking behind them into a cluster of gray shapes against gray sky, when Matthew noticed it. A speedboat maybe half a mile back, matching their course and speed with the kind of precision that spoke of intent. "Victoria," he said quietly, not wanting to alarm Emma, who was at the bow watching for seals. "We've got company." She followed his gaze and her face went pale. "How did they—" She stopped, realization dawning. "My phone. Jesus, my phone. I thought I was careful, but if they cloned it before the parking garage, doesn't matter now. How far to the island? 40 minutes at this speed. Can this thing go faster? Not much, and if we push it, we'll just tell them we know they're following." Victoria's hands tightened on the wheel. "What do we do?" Matthew thought fast, his mind slipping into the tactical mode he'd learned to trust in Kandahar. "We need to split up. You take Emma to the island." "No." Victoria's voice was sharp. "We're not separating. That's what they want." "Victoria." "No, Matthew. Listen to me. These aren't soldiers playing by rules of engagement. They're criminals. If they catch any of us alone, we're dead. Our only chance is together." She was right, and Matthew knew it. He moved to the bow, kneeling beside Emma. "Hey, Sweet Pea. I need you to do something for me." Emma looked up at him with those wide, trusting eyes. "What? See that cabin below deck? I need you to go down there and stay very quiet. Can you do that?" "Why?" Matthew hesitated, weighing honesty against fear. "Because there might be some bad people following us, and Daddy needs to make sure they don't catch up. But you'll be safe down there, I promise." Emma's face crumpled, and for a moment, Matthew thought she might cry. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, so much like her mother it hurt, and nodded. "Okay, Daddy, but you have to promise to come get me when it's safe." "I promise." He hugged her tight, breathing in the smell of her strawberry shampoo. "I love you more than anything." "Love you too." She clutched her penguin and disappeared below deck, and Matthew felt something break inside his chest. The speedboat was closer now, close enough that Matthew could make out 3 figures. One of them, the man at the helm, had salt and pepper hair that caught the morning light. "Volkov," Victoria breathed. "He came himself." "Good." Matthew checked the Sig Sauer, chambering around with a sound that was both familiar and foreign. "Makes this easier." "Matthew, you can't just... Watch me." The speedboat pulled alongside with practiced ease, and Dmitry Volkov stood at the rail like a king surveying his domain. He wore a peacoat against the wind, and his smile was the same terrible expression from the parking garage. Pleasant, patient, utterly devoid of warmth. "Ms. Ashford," he called over the sound of engines and waves. "This is becoming tiresome. Let's talk like reasonable people, yes?" "Go to hell, Dmitry," Victoria shouted back. Volkov sighed, apparent disappointed in a stubborn child. "I had hoped you would be more pragmatic. And you?" His gaze shifted to Matthew. The hero from last night. Still playing protector? How noble. How ultimately futile. Matthew said nothing, but his hand moved to his waistband, fingers brushing the Sig's grip. Volkov noticed and laughed. "Please, you think a handgun frightens me? I have survived wars, coups, assassination attempts by men far more dangerous than a broken-down soldier playing babysitter." He spread his hands. "But I am not unreasonable. Here is my offer. Ms. Ashford, you come with me now. We complete our business, and your new friend and his daughter go home safely. Everyone lives. Very simple." "And if I refuse?" Victoria's voice shook, but she stood firm. "Then everyone dies." Volkov's smile never wavered. "Starting with the child." Matthew had the Sig out before the words fully registered, the weapon trained on Volkov's center mass with the muscle memory of 1,000 training drills. "You threatening my daughter?" "Not a threat. A promise." Volkov seemed unbothered by the gun pointed at him. "You see, I have 4 more boats converging on this position. They will be here in..." He checked his watch. 7 minutes. You cannot outrun them. You cannot fight them all. Your only choice is surrender or death. I am simply trying to minimize the latter." Matthew's finger tensed on the trigger. One shot, center mass, Volkov would be dead before he hit the water. But the other 2 men on the speedboat had drawn weapons too, and even if Matthew took all 3 down, there were still those other boats coming. Still Emma below deck, vulnerable and terrified. "Matthew, don't." Victoria's hand touched his arm gently. "He's right. We can't win this fight. Like hell we can't. Think about Emma. Please." Emma. His daughter. The reason he'd survived Fallujah when Tommy Rodriguez hadn't. The reason he got up every morning and went to a job he hated and came home to an apartment that was falling apart. The reason for everything. Matthew lowered the gun. "Wise choice." Volkov gestured to Victoria. "Come now. Let's finish our business, and everyone goes home." Victoria moved toward the rail, and Matthew's mind raced through possibilities. If she went with Volkov, she was dead. Maybe not immediately, but soon. And Matthew would live with that knowledge for the rest of his life. Another ghost to join Tommy Rodriguez in his nightmares. But if he fought, if he tried to play hero again, Emma might pay the price for his pride. He thought about the parking garage, about that moment when Victoria's eyes had found his across 30 feet of concrete, about the promise he'd made to himself after Fallujah, and about the man he'd been before the war had carved away everything soft and left only scar tissue behind. Then he thought about Emma's voice. "You're the best daddy in the whole world." And Matthew Shaw made his choice. "Wait." He raised the Sig again, but this time he pointed it at the yacht's control panel. "One more step and I put a round through the fuel tank. We all go up together." Volkov's smile finally faltered. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Matthew's voice was steady, cold. the voice of the soldier he'd tried so hard to leave behind. I've died before, Volkov. In Fallujah, in 100 nightmares. Death doesn't scare me. What scares me is living as a coward. So here's my offer, you leave. Now. And we forget this ever happened. And if I refuse, then I'll see you in hell. For a long moment the world held its breath. Waves slapped against hulls. Seabirds screamed overhead. Emma was silent below deck, probably terrified, definitely listening to every word. Volkov studied Matthew with those calculating eyes, and Matthew saw the exact moment when the Russian realized he wasn't bluffing. That this broken-down soldier with his threadbare jacket and decade-old Honda actually would blow them all to pieces rather than surrender. "You're insane," Volkov said quietly. "No, I'm a father. There's a difference." Volkov looked at Victoria, then back at Matthew. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed. A real laugh, full of genuine amusement. "You know what? I like you. You have, how do you say it? Spine. Steel spine." He gestured to his men. "Stand down." "Sir," one of them protested. "I said stand down." Volkov's voice hardened. This one, he would do it. I can see it in his eyes. The same look I saw in Grozny, in men who had nothing left to lose. He turned back to Matthew. "You win today, soldier. But understand, this is not over. Ms. Ashford and I, we have unfinished business. And you? You are now part of that business. Think carefully about whether one woman is worth your daughter's future." The speedboat pulled away, and Matthew kept the gun trained on them until they disappeared into the morning haze. Only then did his hands start shaking, adrenaline crash hitting him like a physical blow. He sank onto the deck, the cig clattering beside him, and tried to remember how to breathe. "Emma," he managed. "Get Emma." Victoria was already moving, climbing down to the cabin. She emerged moments later with Emma pressed against her side. The girl's face streaked with tears, but her eyes fierce. Emma launched herself at Matthew, and he caught her, held her, felt her small body trembling against his chest. "I was so scared," she sobbed into his shoulder. "I thought he was going to hurt you." "I'm okay, baby. We're okay. Everyone's okay." "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," Victoria said, her own voice shaking. "And the stupidest. You really would have blown us up." Matthew looked up at her over Emma's head. In a heartbeat, she shook her head in wonder. "You're insane." "So I've been told." They reached the island 20 minutes later, a rocky outcrop crowned with pine trees and a modern glass house that seemed to grow from the stone itself. Victoria's sanctuary, her secret place, and now potentially their prison if Volkov decided to finish what he'd started. But for now, they were alive. That was enough. The next 3 days passed in a strange kind of limbo. Matthew helped Victoria strengthen the house's security, such as it was, while Emma explored tide pools and built castles from stones and driftwood. At night, they ate dinner together like a family, and Matthew read to Emma while Victoria worked her phone, making calls to lawyers and investigators and anyone who might help them build a case against Volkov that would actually stick. On the 4th day, she finally had news. "I found someone," Victoria said, her face illuminated by her laptop's glow. "A federal prosecutor who's been investigating Volkov for years. He has evidence, money laundering, racketeering, the works. But he could never get anyone to testify because they were too afraid. And now I'm willing to testify. And with my resources, my platform, he thinks we might actually have a shot." She looked at Matthew, hope and fear warring in her expression. "But it means going back to Seattle, going public, painting a target on our backs." Matthew thought about Volkov's words. "Think carefully about whether one woman is worth your daughter's future." He thought about the quiet life he'd built, the safety he'd tried to provide for Emma, and he thought about the man he'd been in that parking garage, the one who'd stepped forward when every rational part of his brain screamed to walk away. "When do we leave?" he asked. Victoria's testimony broke the case wide open. Within 2 weeks, federal agents raided 3 of Volkov's properties, seizing documents and servers and enough evidence to build a case that would take years to fully untangle. Volkov himself disappeared, fled to Russia, the rumors said, or maybe somewhere without extradition treaties. The media loved the story. Single dad veteran saves billionaire CEO became the headline that launched 1,000 think pieces about masculinity, heroism, and class in America. Matthew hated every second of it, but he endured the interviews and the camera flashes because Victoria needed him to, because they'd become something more than protector and protected, something that didn't have a name yet but felt like the beginning of something important. Victoria's company stock recovered within a month. She offered Matthew a job, head of security, with a salary that made his maintenance wages look like pocket change. He accepted, but with conditions. No spotlight, no press conferences, and Saturdays off for Emma's soccer games. The nightmares came back, as Matthew had known they would. Violence always exacted its price, paid in installments of darkness and cold sweats. But now Victoria was there, and sometimes she'd wake him when he thrashed in his sleep, talking him down from the ledge of memory with a gentleness that reminded him what peace could feel like. 6 months later, Matthew stood on the sidelines of Emma's soccer field, watching his daughter score her 3rd goal of the game. Victoria stood beside him, her hand in his, and when Emma looked over after her goal, she waved at both of them with a smile that could light cities. "She's amazing," Victoria said. "Yeah, she is." Matthew squeezed her hand. "Did I tell you she wants to be a marine biologist now? Firmly committed. No more professional soccer player." "What changed her mind?" "The seals. At your island. She said any place that has seals is a place she wants to spend her life protecting." Matthew smiled. "So thank you for that. Thank you for protecting me. For choosing to step forward instead of walking away. You would have done the same." "I'd like to think so, but I've never been tested the way you were." Victoria leaned against him, and Matthew wrapped his arm around her shoulders, marveling at how natural it felt. "Have you thought about my offer? About moving into the house in Ballard?" "Victoria, that place has 7 bedrooms. We don't need 7 bedrooms. Emma could have her own art studio, and there's a guest house where Mrs. Chun could stay if she wanted. She's been good to you." Matthew was quiet for a moment, watching Emma high-five her teammates. "It's a lot. Moving in together, blending our lives. What if it doesn't work? What if it does?" Victoria turned to face him. "Matthew, I'm not good at this. Relationships, vulnerability, letting someone see past the CEO mask. But you've seen me at my worst, bleeding and terrified in a parking garage, and you didn't run. You fought for me. Not because of my money or my company, but because you saw someone who needed help. That's not something I take lightly. I didn't do it for gratitude. I know. You did it because that's who you are. The kind of man who steps forward when others step back. The kind of father who would blow up a boat rather than let his daughter down. The kind of person She paused, and for the first time since he'd met her, Victoria Ashford looked uncertain. "The kind of person I'm falling in love with." Matthew's breath caught. "Victoria, you don't have to say it back. I know this is complicated, and we're still figuring things out. But I needed you to know. That night in the parking garage, you saved my life. These past months, you've been saving me in ways I'm still discovering." Matthew thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago. Lonely, struggling, convinced that his best days were behind him. And he thought about the man he was now, standing on a soccer field with a woman who saw past his scars to something worth loving, watching his daughter play the sport she loved without worrying if they could afford next month's rent. "I love you too," he said, and the words felt like coming home after a long war. "I don't know how this works or where it goes, but I love you. And Emma loves you, which is even more important." Victoria kissed him then, soft and sweet, and Matthew kissed her back with the certainty of someone who'd finally found a reason to believe in happy endings. Emma scored another goal, and this time when she looked over, she saw them kissing and made an exaggerated gagging gesture that made them both laugh. But she was smiling too, her gap-toothed grin bright as sunshine, and Matthew knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges or complications or unexpected dangers, they would face them together. He'd spent years running from connection, afraid that caring meant being vulnerable to loss. But Victoria had taught him something important. The opposite of courage wasn't cowardice. It was isolation. Safety purchased by building walls so high that nothing could hurt you, but nothing could reach you either. Matthew Shaw had been a soldier, a father, a maintenance worker, a hero in a parking garage. Now he was something more. Someone who'd learned that the bravest thing you could do wasn't facing down armed men or risking your life for a stranger. The bravest thing was letting yourself love and be loved in return. Knowing that loss was always possible but choosing connection anyway. As Emma's game ended and she ran toward them with her arms outstretched, Matthew caught her up in a hug that lifted her off the ground, and Victoria wrapped her arms around both of them. They stood there on the sidelines while other parents packed up their folding chairs and coolers. Three people who'd found each other in the chaos and decided to build something lasting from the wreckage. Pizza? Emma asked hopefully. From Angelo's? Pizza, Matthew confirmed. And then that penguin documentary we never watched. And ice cream. Emma pushed her luck. Matthew looked at Victoria, who nodded with a smile. And ice cream, as they walked toward the parking lot. Emma between them, holding both their hands. Matthew thought about Dmitry Volkov wherever he was in the world. The Russian had been wrong about one thing. Victoria Ashford hadn't been worth just Matthew's future. She'd been worth his past, his present, and every moment yet to come. Because sometimes saving someone else was really about saving yourself. And sometimes the person you rescued ended up rescuing you right back. Matthew's Honda, soon to be replaced by something that didn't require prayer to start, sat waiting in the parking lot. Emma climbed into the back seat, chattering about her goals and how she'd totally schooled that girl from the other team, and Victoria slid in beside Matthew with the easy comfort of someone who belonged. Angelo's? Matthew asked. Angelo's, Victoria confirmed. And Matthew? Yeah. Thank you. For everything. For being brave enough to step forward that night. For teaching me that real strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. Matthew reached over and squeezed her hand. Anytime. Literally. He started the car. It caught on the first try, a minor miracle, and pulled out onto the street as Emma sang off-key in the back seat and Victoria laughed at something on her phone. The Seattle sky was doing its usual gray thing, threatening rain but holding off for now, and somewhere across the city, the Ashford Technologies building gleamed like a beacon of everything they'd fought to protect. But Matthew didn't look at it. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, on Emma's face in the rearview mirror, on Victoria's profile as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The future stretched before them, uncertain and full of possibility, and for the first time in years, Matthew wasn't afraid of what it might bring. He'd faced kidnappers and mobsters and his own demons. He could handle whatever came next, especially if there was pizza involved. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon.